Well, welcome to week 3 in our series, Big Potential. And this week, of course, Josh brought the message. We're so glad that you've committed to this community group experiment. I hope that you've enjoyed your time together with other believers, just kind of sharing your thoughts, your interests, your perspectives, and takeaways from the weekend message. This week is no different. We'd love for you, if you haven't had some time as you got started, to do a little bit of debrief, think about the highs, the lows of the past week, to be able to share that with one another so that you really do connect around your genuine needs this evening. You might even find that as you share those things, that part of the answer to maybe the things you're struggling with, you'll actually find in the discussion together. God's just kind of like that. He likes to show off from time to time. Well, this was a great message this weekend about what it means to serve, and Josh had several things to share with us. As he opened his message this week, he talked about a lot about what gets in the way of spiritual transformation. And you list several things, and one of the first things you mentioned, which I think probably hits us all in a big way, is we say we just don't have the time. I was wondering if you might kind of expand on that thought a little bit.
Yes, time reveals a lot about who we are, a lot about what we prioritize, what we're willing to do, what we're willing to partake in. And none of us really has the time for growth, because growth requires you being intentional. Growth requires you setting aside something else that you wanted to do, or something more comfortable or easy. So time really is going to tell us what matters most to you. What's the priority? And I'm as busy as the next guy, and the next guy's maybe even busier than me. And so we all have the excuse of, well, there's just no time. Since we all only get 24 hours a day, we think, well, I didn't have time. I don't know how you have the time to do that. So growth really requires us to say, in my time, I want to set aside, be intentional about specifically providing this amount of time, whether that's I'm going to spend 5 more minutes doing this, or I'm going to live 10 minutes beyond myself, cut my lunch short, or cut my free time short so that I can be about something else that might grow me through God's work in my life.
So time and priorities really do play off of each other. We often use the phrase, I don't have the time. And what I've discovered is that's not really honest language. The more honest language is, I'm not making the time to do that. So in terms of bringing my priority discussion over into the time thing, I'm not making time for things that are really valuable in my life. They always say, if you can look at somebody's schedule and their spending, you can instantly know what their priorities are. And that's true. I mean, those things don't lie, because where we're giving our time and our money are the things that really matter most to us. And so we do want to measure our spirituality, which is truly one of the most important things about us. Do we spend our time, our energy, our money in investing in those things that really matter and really do last? You also mentioned not just time and priorities, which is one huge aspect, but another, you said discomfort. Change is always uncomfortable. And as a society, we practically worship comfort. Do you have any thoughts that you'd like to add along that line?
Yeah, anything that's worth growth requires a change, requires discomfort. If you want to get bigger muscles, you have to lift things that are heavy and they're hard to do. If you want to see better results in your productivity at work, you have to put in extra effort, extra time, extra motivation. And so it really comes down to, we have to be willing to put in the discomfort, have to be willing to endure the pain that comes with that. And it really, if you want to grow, you can say, well, I want to grow, but I don't have the time, or it's not a priority. Another way to say it is, I don't want to grow. I don't want to deal with change. I don't want to give time to that. I don't want to give my priority to that. I'd rather do X or Y. And that really comes down to, do you want to grow? Because it's going to be hard. It's going to be weird and uncomfortable, but I would say it's worth it. Seeing little increments of growth in my life, it's definitely worth it to be where I am than where I was.
Yeah. So I think that last thing you said, especially around increments of growth, sometimes when we try to change our life, we do these broad sweeping changes that we can't possibly maintain in the future. And so sometimes to do one right thing, one new thing, like somebody wanted to read the Bible, there's 31 chapters in Proverbs. You could read a proverb every day corresponding to the day of the month and just begin that way, just a chapter, not committing to, I'm going to read a whole book of the Bible every day, but just say, hey, I'm going to read a few verses every day. So in steps, it makes a difference. So here's our question for this section. Do you identify with any of these impediments in your own spiritual life? And are there others? Are there other things that get in the way of real spiritual transformation? And then I'd like you to share with one another, what have you personally found helpful in overcoming that inertia? We can learn so much from the experience of one another. So that's the question we're going to put up on the screen. And if you take a time to pause right now and discuss this among yourself, we'll be right back. Okay, I hope that was a really productive time. I wish we could be a fly on the wall in your homes and hear that discussion. We could learn so much from you and from your own experience. The second part of the message, Josh was sharing with us, I thought this was a great contrast between volunteers and servants. And in particular, one of the things you mentioned is that volunteers often will serve out of convenience. I've committed this time. When that time's up, I'm out of here. Yeah. But a servant has a different kind of heart. They will push beyond what's convenient. They will do just what needs to be done, and they'll show up and they'll stay late. They go the extra mile, right?
Yeah.
I think we can probably all relate to a time when we were voluntold to do something. Maybe it was on the job. Maybe it was at school. You were on a committee. Maybe it was a project you were sharing at school, whatever that might be. A lot of times we get voluntold to do things, and our attitude shows, doesn't it? I mean, when we're told to do something, and maybe that's one big difference too between a volunteer and a servant. A volunteer, it's kind of a have to, I need to do this. And a servant really wants to. I'll never forget one of the things that was said to me really young in my spiritual experience. Somebody said, the best test of a servant is how do you react when somebody treats you like one? Because, that's one of those questions that kind of really gets to our DNA, who we really are and what we're becoming. If we really do have a servant's heart, like Jesus had a servant's heart, then when someone treats me like a servant, I say, that's okay. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to serve you. And when we're not really a servant, then we get prickly really, really fast. I'm wondering if there's any other things that might distinguish, like a volunteer from a servant, whether it's something we see just in the volunteer or something we see uniquely in a servant. What other things we might look for that tell us whether we have a heart or spirit of a volunteer versus a servant?
Yeah, I think volunteers are willing and servants are willing, but there's often fruit incorporated with that. A volunteer is, I'm willing to give an hour of my time to pick up trash because then I'll be seen as a pillar in the community that picks up trash. I'll feel good about myself. Whereas a servant takes that hour of service and recognizes this is not about me. This is more than who I could possibly be or what I do. Or some people, I'm willing to volunteer at my kid's school because that'll make my kids happy and my wife happy. And if I can keep them happy, then I'll be happy. Life will be easier. And so your motivation behind your service is really what's driving you. And a servant is someone who sets aside time, comfort, priorities, and is willing to say, I don't have time. This is going to be uncomfortable. It should be a priority. But I'm going to do this because it's got a greater value. And I don't get a lot of benefit out of it. I don't find more joy in less trash or the dogs getting walked or whatever your service may be. But I know that God has a calling for me and there's going to be glory for God and fruit for God in this. So we commit to that service.
Wow, that's good. So here's what we'd like you to do. We're going to put this question up on the screen. Describe a time when you had a true servant's heart. And just think about that. Whatever that occasion may have been, whether it was in church, outside of church, when you had a true servant's heart, you were invested in it. Time just seemed to fly by while you were doing it. And it didn't matter what you were doing. You were just glad to be serving. What difference did that make in you? But then what difference did that make in others around you? So describe a time when you had a true servant's heart. What difference did that make in you? What difference did it make in others? So once again, if you'll take a moment and just pause the video and have this discussion among yourself, we've got one more question. We'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, that was awesome. Glad you guys had this time to talk. We have one more part, and I think this was really at the heart of the message. It's where you begin. It's how you wrapped up. No se trata de mí. It's not about me. Powerful statement. Reminded me of the worldwide phenomenal bestseller, Purpose Driven Life. Very first line in the book. It's not about you. So Rick Warren is writing about our life purpose, what we were destined to be. And he begins with taking ego out of the equation. You would think if this is about the purpose driven life and it's about me, that this book would all be about me, but it's really not. It's not about me. So you pointed out really powerfully in Philippians 2 that we were all created with a purpose, and that purpose was to do good works, that God in his grace had saved us, that God had bestowed upon us this wonderful new life, but that was with a real intentionality of a purpose. So in Philippians 2, he says, look out for the interest of others. But then he gives us the example of Jesus. And this is for theologians, for pastors. The term we use for this is from the Greek word kenosis. This is the kenosis passage. And kenosis is a Greek word that means self-emptying. And so it begins by encouraging us to serve others, but then turns and pivots and tells us about the kenosis, or the emptying of Christ. You didn't spend much time on that in your message, but would you expand on that for us now?
Yeah, the kenosis is a beautiful thing for us to consider. He's the King of Kings. He's on his throne, almighty, all powerful, can do all things. And he made a choice because of the Father's calling in his life to empty himself, to rid himself of full royalty. Like his bank account was full, and he decided, I'm going to get rid of all of that, go back to zero balance so I can be like them.
Yeah.
And Paul plays on that in the intro to Philippians 2 by saying you should be like-minded. You should have encouragement from sharing in the Spirit. You should be together in oneness. And Jesus demonstrated that by saying, I could stay up here on my throne and I'd be just fine. But there's more to this than me. And if I do this, if I rid myself of all my royalty, if I lay down my crown, not thinking, well, I can just come back whenever, but this is going to be hard. I'm going to endure pain. I'm going to feel loss. I'm going to grieve, and I'm going to deal with people who are kind of stubborn and don't get it.
Right.
Not knowing, fully knowing, yes, I will return to my kingdom, but I have to go through a lot of junk to do that. And so he fully emptied himself so that one day we would all get to see what it looks like to have him as our Savior and as our King.
Yeah. The beautiful thing I loved about this, and I was thinking about it when I heard your message on Saturday night, that this brings our whole series full circle, because we begin with grow, then we talked about connect, and then we talk about serve. And we also talked that Jesus, this was his pattern. He spent time alone with his Father. He gathered a community together. Then he went out to do ministry. But the priority, the beginning, our set point is to grow, to connect with God, and really to serve. The ultimate example of service is Jesus Christ, for him to be more fully formed in me. So the question that was on my mind last night is, how do I get me out of the picture? And to get me out of the picture where it's not about me, this is not just about me squashing my will or me saying, hey, I'm a piece of dirt and I don't matter. It's not that.
Right.
It's about Christ being formed in me. And if Christ is formed in me, then I begin to resemble him more and more in my attitudes and things. And so what does it mean to be emptied? Well, the best example is, let's get in touch with Jesus and let's look at how he emptied himself. I mean, everything from the birth, the King of Kings, the Lord of glory, the one to whom every knee will bow and every tongue confess that he is the rightful Lord, sovereign over the universe one day. That king emptied himself to be born in squalor, to be born not even in sanitary conditions, to be born in a manger, to be worshiped and surrounded by the poorest of the poor. This is Jesus' entire life, who he spends his time with. These are all examples of service. And then, of course, what you just mentioned, the cross itself, to humble yourself and be obedient to the cross, to be willing to lay down your life. I mean, that is what it means to have a servant's heart. So in this last part of our discussion, I'd like you to think about the life of Jesus, what you know. Maybe you don't have a real thorough knowledge of the Gospels, but what you've heard about Jesus, what you understand about Jesus, what was it about God come in human flesh? What was it about his example, about his life that inspires you to become more like Jesus? You know, so share examples in this last point, share examples from the life of Jesus where he had a true servant's heart. And this is your opportunity. Maybe if you've studied a little bit more in Scripture, maybe have a little bit more knowledge of some things that happen in the Bible, to share some of that with one another, to build each other up. So that's where we'd like to leave you with. We are so glad you've been a part of this community group experiment, and it is so appropriate that we end climactically and triumphantly on the example of Jesus Christ.
Amen.